Hello and welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. It was very interesting news last week when the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, revealed at the maiden annual lecture of the National Association of the Institute for Security Studies that he was denied a visa to Canada to attend the Invictus Games. Responding to this, the National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu, described the visa snub as disrespectful. He commended the CDS for speaking about the incident and then went on to add his insults, which I will not repeat here for diplomatic purposes. But they both agreed, though, it was indicative of the need for Nigerians to fix their country, to make Nigeria work. And work we must, isn't it? We must work to make Nigeria great again, but we all know that working to make Nigeria great again usually begins with the leadership, save for any other country on the continent. Probably why leaders at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia over the weekend charged each other to unite and take decisive steps to address the various challenges confronting the continent. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu was there with his peers. Here's a report from our correspondent, Nari Asisi.
The Nelson Mandela Hall is filled as presidents, former presidents, ministers and heads of international agencies gather for the opening ceremony of the 38th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union. Taking place at the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, it is a chance to consider the state of the Union and the challenges confronting the continent. The United Nations Secretary General assures the Union of support in the push for critical reforms on the world stage.
Africa was under colonial domination when today's multilateral system was created, and that injustice endures. There is no excuse that Africa still lacks permanent representation in the 21st century. And we will keep pressing together for an international financial architecture that is no longer outdated, dysfunctional, and unfair. Correcting age-old injustices is essential to address here and now challenges.
Speakers highlight the need to ensure peace returns to the Republic of the Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. A passionate case was made for the theme of the year, Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations.
Let us remove the scars of history and be firm craftsmen of our faith, recognizing that the only people who can stop us now are we, but ourselves. We have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and to build the future that our people want of us, and to give them that pride that is theirs. And we must do so in the spirit and with the results of ADWA.
The session also saw the new chairman of the African Union, the president of Angola, Joao Lourenço, take his seat, and Mahmoud Ali Yusuf was also elected as the new chairman of the African Union Commission. With the mounting challenges from within and from outside the continent, this summit presents the African Union with a unique opportunity to reassess and reform itself so as to be ready to meet the needs of the people of Africa. From the headquarters of the African Union here in Addis Ababa, Lanre Lasisi, Channels Television News.
And here are other discussions in diplomatic circles.
The AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, has warned that escalation should not become open conflict, drawing the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan into the limelight. He was addressing a press conference on the sidelines of the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We condemn, like our council did last Friday at presidential level, all forms of violations, grave violations against women, children in the Sudan. And what is critical in all these conflict areas in Africa is that we do not see a military solution. The African Union wants to promote dialogue, mediation, so that we can continue to pray and hope for peace dividends. The Lake Chad Basin also remains concerning, but we really commend the gallantry, the professionalism of the multinational joint task force under the umbrella of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. We have mobilized more resources for this force. But our concern in West Africa is basically the spectra of unconstitutional changes of government, terrorism, and violent extremism.
The chairman, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri Erewa, has warned that the lives of Nigerians, especially the youth, must be protected from exploitation, while ensuring that the need to migrate is based on choice and not out of necessity. She was addressing a press conference of the Association of Recruiter License Placement Agencies of Nigeria, themed Effect and Implications of Consistent Irregular Migration in Lagos. Speaking through a representative, Mrs. Dabiri Erewa described the matter as a national concern in which private and public organizations must collaborate to address the root causes of irregular migration and dismantle networks of illegal recruiters.
There was another summit holding in Europe over the weekend, and it had to do mostly with Europe's security, with particular attention to the war in Ukraine. Let's just say fell short of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's expectations.
But also because we have to make sure that we can...
The tone for the security summit in Munich, which holds every year, was perhaps set by the NATO meeting preceding it in Brussels. European defense ministers gave the impression the war in Ukraine will take center stage. Even NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was questioned about it. But while NATO struggled to explain why membership for Ukraine was not in the plans for now,
where in those lines it says that it should be part of a peace deal now? Where did you see that?
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen insisted that Europe must be involved in peace talks proposed by US President Donald Trump. Her comments followed US President Donald Trump's revelation on his social media platform Truth Social that he had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Putin on Wednesday, in which the leaders agreed to begin negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Later, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he had spoken with Mr. Trump about a lasting, reliable peace. But as the Munich summit wore on, the Ukrainian president insisted that no decision should be made on ending Russia's war on Ukraine without Kiev and Europe. Following his talks later with the US Vice President J.D. Vance, the Ukrainian president emphasized the importance of concrete security guarantees and investments.
Ukraine will never accept deals made behind our backs without our involvement. And the same rule should apply to all of Europe. No decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine, no decisions about Europe without Europe.
President Zelensky has gone ahead to reject joining talks with Russia and the United States holding in Saudi Arabia this week. The government source tells the BBC that Ukraine has not been invited and will not send a delegation.
And looked like to carve up the world.
I want to bring in now senior policy analyst and international relations expert, Dr. Francis Opaleke, to navigate through these issues. Dr. Opaleke joins us from Alberta, Canada. I appreciate you joining us on the program today, Dr. Opaleke.
Always a pleasure to be here, Amarachi. Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you. First off, let me get your take on what has perhaps caught the attention of many Nigerians, and that is the visa denial of the Chief of Defense Staff by the Canadian High Commission here in Nigeria. And I ask this question because you do some consulting in this area, in addition to your work as a university professor. So does Canada have a right to approve or deny visa to anyone? And do they have their reasons? Is it okay for this also to be in public light?
Well, as a matter of fact, Canada does have the right or have the discretion to determine who gets a visa approval or denial. But for the sake of General Christopher Musa, I think the level at which that denial did come in terms of the publicity was something that really kind of stoked the attention of many Nigerians. And that's simply because many Nigerians, of course, are in this JAPA rush right now. And the question that will be lingering on their mind right in this instance is if someone as high as General Christopher Musa and, of course, a number of security personnel can get their visa refused, what will be the fate of many other Nigerians there as well? But I think beyond that, I think the bigger question here is the bigger question relating to the publicity of this visa refusals. And I think for Nigeria, the bigger piece will be the bilateral tension we can stoke between Nigeria and Canada at the moment. Of course, getting that response from the Nigerian security advisor, Nudu Rubadu, also kind of saying this is not a very palatable situation right now for Nigeria and Canada at this instance. So yes, it doesn't come well. It's not something that really kind of is the news you want to hear right now in terms of visa denial. And many, of course, will have many questions that will be seeking many answers in their mind at this instance.
I just want to quickly explore, what the National Security Advisor did say. I think for the sake of diplomacy, I will not repeat his words verbatim, but he did say something really derogatory to Canada, and then thanked the Chief of Defense Staff for being bold enough to, commended him for being bold enough to talk about the situation, and then, said, this also shows that we need to fix Nigeria, and that's something we've been talking about for years, about fixing Nigeria. But was that really the problem? I mean, when you look at what the Chief of Defense Staff was going to Canada for, I think it was Invictus Games. He was just attending a major military event for veterans. And Nigeria, being part of Invictus, had to have a showing there. We had a delegation there in Canada. Did that have anything to do with, the issue of fixing Nigeria? I mean, the CDS was not jackpotting, as, we like to say here. He was going for an event and was going to come back to Nigeria.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question there. But then again, like you would know, a lot of people that do JAPA and many people that are intending to JAPA, they will always say one thing. If Nigeria is fixed, the propensity or the impetus for people to want to go overseas to seek better life and to get better experiences will not be like kind of top of priority. Think about it. The many countries we are going to, Europe, Canada, United States, many of these countries, they kind of got their systems together. They have a working system. And that is what many Nigerians who want to really kind of have a working system will probably desire. And for them, like, it is now a very galvanizing factor for them to really kind of push to JAPA. Now, JAPA here, of course, is to travel overseas and get a broad experience, or to a different experience abroad. But vis-a-vis the Invictus game and why that denial did happen, fixing Nigeria could actually just come into the fray. Right now, Nigeria have really gotten a lot of bad rap in the international scene. And that bad rap, of course, has a spillover effect in terms of our passport is respected abroad. There's just a limit to how many countries a Nigerian can really travel to with a Nigerian passport. And many times, think about it. Like, for example, if you have a passport as strong like the Singaporean passport, you can go to 195 countries. If you have a New Zealand passport, 190 countries. You have less than, you can only go to about 40 countries with a Nigerian passport, and you still have to apply for several visas to get that achieved. So I think that is a very major factor in terms of fixing Nigeria. How can we make Nigeria better? If you think about Singapore many years ago, Singapore was not a very top country, and it took the visionary leadership of Lee Kuan Yew to be able to get that country back in track. And getting that country back in track brought Singapore to the limelight it is today, and that's why they have a strong passport. Most of the citizens don't need to like apply for visas. Think about it. If the general didn't need to apply for visas, it was just a simple case of buying a flight ticket and flying off to Canada to attend the Invictus game. So fixing Nigeria sure has a bit of a piece to really kind of play in all of this, and I think it's something that should be a very core factor going forward in terms of how we're thinking about Nigeria of the future, the one that we want the future generation to really enjoy and pass on to the generation after.
Well, I think we can rest easy now as, the hostages and prisoner handover between Israel and Hamas did take place on Saturday. 3 Israeli hostages were exchanged for 369 Palestinian prisoners. This almost never happened this weekend. As we were talking, just before the interview, we kept, touching base regarding what was happening in Israel and all of that. And the reason why there was so much tension about this weekend was because of the rhetoric from Hamas saying it would not honor the peace deal, the ceasefire deal, beg your pardon, and Israel saying, well, if Hamas doesn't honor it, we will not honor it either, and then the war continues. Now, if Hamas was not promising to hand over these hostages, how devastating would it have been for the Israeli government? Because there'd been so much pressure on the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, both within Israel and outside, to at least agree to a ceasefire, not just for the handover of, these prisoners, but also so that, aid and supplies do get into Gaza.
Absolutely. Look, I would just say one thing. I'm just glad that the prisoner exchange or the swap and the ceasefire, of course, did take place. And Hamas, as well as Benjamin Netanyahu government, were able to come into a place where this exchange was facilitated. Of course, I have to say that it's quite disproportionate, the numbers in terms of the exchange taking place. So far, 19 Israelis have been released, and 269 so far have come back to the Palestinian side. But then again, like you mentioned, if this didn't happen, I think public support for the Benjamin Netanyahu government would have also kind of dipped very low. Like I did mention ab initio, public support is critical for the government at this instance. Since the 7th October 2023 attack, when it happened over 15 months ago, there have been that spotlight on Israel in terms of what it is doing to secure the safe release of Israelis and other foreign nationals that were kidnapped by Hamas in Gaza. And I think the fact that some of these releases are now taking place, even though some of these prisoners that have been, some of these people that have been taken hostage, their lives cannot be guaranteed in terms of whether they're still alive or not. But one thing we can actually take away is that these exchanges is actually building that momentum that slowly and surely that this ceasefire will be something that kind of stays longer. And eventually most of the hostages that have been taken since 7th October 2023 will slowly get back to the other side to the part of peace where, of course, there are no more infightings and fightings between both countries. Yes, I'm really glad that this happened, and we're open and having that prognostication that further down the line, more of these safe releases of these hostages would happen, and Israel can actually secure the safe release of these hostages, and the support for the government can also come much higher than it can ever before. But then again, I also have to just kind of throw in that that phone call or the intervention of Donald Trump to say, hey, look, if Hamas doesn't kind of cooperate, that Israel has the backing of the United States to kind of withdraw in terms of any exchanges that was really going to happen. Perhaps that was just the critical part that really kind of pushed some very vital buttons for these exchanges to happen. But by and large, it's good to see that this is happening. This is what we want to see. This is what we've been anticipating. But we're not really very surprised that the disproportionate numbers of exchanges taking place at this instance.
Well, as a policy analyst and one who looks at strategy and all of that, I wanted you to probably take us through into the mind of the U.S. President Donald Trump when he says the U.S. does plan to take over Gaza. He wants the Palestinians in Gaza to move into other neighboring Arab countries, and he wants Jordan to be one of those countries that takes in these Palestinian refugees, even though the Jordanian king has said it's not possible, they're already overwhelmed. But here is Trump, who's threatening them with sanctions and saying they have to do it. Help us understand what the strategy is here, where the destination is, with a plan like this?
I think it's quite interesting. International law is very clear. You can't force citizens or residents in one country to move into another country forcefully. The same way America would not accept, as a matter of fact, citizens from other country moving into America. I think the same thing can also apply. As a matter of fact, Jordan has been taking in Palestinians, not now, but has been taking several Palestinians in. In fact, since the displacement of Palestinians, over 2,000 of them have really kind of kind of landed in Jordan, and Jordan has been very open and receptive to taking them in. Now, you can't take away, Jordan is a very key ally to the United States in that region. I think when Donald Trump makes such posturings like this, I think he risks irking or kind of upsetting very important strategic allies that have been, it has been in place long before his administration came into power. So I think forcing Jordan or kind of pushing Jordan or backing them up in the corner to accept, populations that are displaced from Gaza into Jordan, I think is less feasible to happen. And the U.S. taking over Gaza, I think that will cost the U.S. government a lot of money and time and resources. We've seen that in the past where U.S. have, tried to occupy territories overseas in the Middle East. We learned that from Bush's administration, how expensive it was, how that also kind of brought down public support for the government. And I think the same thing or worse would actually happen if U.S. Thinks that his expansionism into that territory will be something that favors the U.S. More often than not, we know one thing with certainty: this kind of move costs a lot, and even while it might look good on paper, we know strategy is deeper than just surface articulations. So I think that wouldn't have really happened. I think he would have gotten better advice from his advisors to kind of advise to say, hey, look, this is not going to be tenable. And like we already know, the king has said that is not going to happen. They're not going to be taking more people in because I think they're running to, a lot of full capacity right now at this instance. And by and large, bringing in more people into another country requires an extra things like social amenities, infrastructure, social provisioning. These things are quite critical. And again, guaranteeing security as well. The people coming in are not skilled migrants. They're not skilled labor force. They are just people that have been displaced from the war, and it is the Jordanian government that have to now look after providing for them, settling them in. And I think there's a lot for a government right now to really kind of start looking into. So I think those posturings by Donald Trump were just, for me, were like just grand visioning that did not really have very concrete solidity in terms of materializing. And while he may have this vision that the U.S. can do it all, and the U.S. is all powerful and grand, in reality, nothing can really happen without, of course, strategic operations with this country. And that is why the Donald Trump administration thought it imperative to invite the Jordanian king for talks. And in that talks, he did mention he was not in agreement for that to happen. Now, the threat of sanction is looming. We can't throw that away. But then again, how many nations can really sanction to the point of conformance? Yes, sanction does have an effect. We've seen other countries actually conform when sanctions were kind of waved in front of them. For example, when the Colombian government did send back the plane that was bringing Colombian deportees back into the country, or Colombian nationals, I beg your pardon, into the country, we saw how the Colombian government took the stance and said, hey, look, this is not the best way to kind of bring them in. But when sanctions were threatened, the Colombian government did back down and, of course, did make a U-turn and say, hey, bring them in. But then again, the United States needs to think, because it's not only going to be breaking international law, because this is similar to what we call the concept of ethnic cleansing, forcing people to be moved in mass from where they are occupied to a totally new country where they are not part and parcel of. And then again, this goes far and deep. And then again, wiping out the entirety of Palestinians from Palestine, from Gaza, to a totally different country, has bigger, deeper security and ramifications more than what is just being tabled right now by Donald Trump. It's not as easy as it appears on paper. Like, since 1947, there's been this improving war between Israel and the Palestinians. And if that were to happen, it just simply means Israel is just being given that entire country to kind of have of its own, and there'll be a lot of conversations.
Right.
And of course, United States will also lose its soft power as well, which it has historically wielded around the world when it does that. So yeah, there's just a lot of ramifications that will come through away at this instance, and we just have to keep our eyes on the lookout in terms of what the president will do.
Right, and it does appear that Trump is treating America as his empire, as an empire state in comparison to the rest of the world. We'll see how that turns out. Dr. Francis Opaleke, a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you very much, Amarachi. Pleasure's all mine.
If you stayed with us till the end, you might as well drop us a comment on today's show in the comment section. Let us know what you think. And perhaps you'd like to reach me via social media. The addresses are on your screen. I'm Amarachi Ubani. See you next time.